Good afternoon, and welcome to today's session entitled When Women of Color Lead, Climate and Environment Win. I am Wesley, and I am a member of the board of Philanos. Philanos is an organization that is comprised of 80 different organizations throughout the United States, Europe, and Australia. Collectively, we've invested approximately $140 million back into our communities through nonprofit organizations. Today, we'll have a panel discussion, and it is sponsored by Rachel's Network. And I'll stop now and say thank you to Rachel's Network for the $5,000 grant that was given to Philanos. Our topic of environmental justice will be handled by that panel, and I will now turn it over to Ariana Carella of Rachel's Network to begin our session.
Thank you, Gwen, for the introduction, and to Philanos for inviting us to sponsor this program. I'm Ariana Carella, and I'm the Network Engagement Director at Rachel's Network, a community of 100+ women funders connecting at the intersection of philanthropy, women's leadership, and environment. I'm here in Washington, D.C. on Piscataway and Nacotchtank land. Before I introduce our speakers and the overview of this session, I wanted to share why Rachel's Network began to fund in this space. Not only are we facing a planetary crisis, but that crisis is interlinked with our history of racism and racial inequality. The decisions about where to put pipelines or mines or where to direct agricultural runoff or hazardous waste have not been arbitrary. These decisions are made intentionally so that Black, Indigenous, and people of color face disproportionate harms as their livelihoods, safety, health, and homes are sacrificed for greed and profit. Over the past several years, Rachel's Network has been educating ourselves about the impacts of environmental racism and the significant discrepancy in funding that organizations and movements led by women of color receive in comparison to white and male-led groups. In alignment with our mission of promoting women leaders, Rachel's Network decided to invest our resources in addressing these inequities. In 2019, we developed the Catalyst Award, which recognizes women leaders of color with monetary prizes, networking, and leadership support. I encourage you to learn about our awardees and finalists on our website at rachelsnetwork.org. All of them are astounding. We are really honored to know them, to believe in them, and to be in service to them and their power. During this session, you'll hear from 3 of our awardees about their work. Cordalis, the first enrolled Yurok citizen to serve as the tribe's general counsel, who has spent her life restoring the Klamath River and the region's salmon population. Annel Hernandez, the Associate Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and one of the key people in the passage of New York's Climate Leadership and Protection Act. And Brionté, McCorkle, the Director of Georgia Conservation Voters, who has dedicated her career to building partnerships that protect the environment, advance racial equity, and grow civic engagement. Afterwards, I'll be joined by our board chair, Kasdin, to share more about what we've learned and how you can support this ecosystem of brilliant leaders. We are honored to be a part of a growing group of donors and donor networks fighting for just policies and equitable giving. In fact, an alternate title for this session might be Who and How to Fund Environmental Justice. We hope that by the end of the session, you are moved to join us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our key presenters. First question for all of you. Tell us about you and your work and how it relates to environmental justice. Let's start with Amy.
Neck now, Amy Cordalis, Nuwak Rekwoy, Numatewa, Waklao. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Cordalis. I am a Yurok tribal member. I am a fisherwoman, mother, and attorney. I am the principal of the Ridges to Ripples Conservation Fund, which is a Native American nonprofit focused on advancing the cultural resource and natural resource interests of tribes and Indian people across the country. My primary work right now is on behalf of the Yurok tribe. I represent the Yurok tribe in Klamath River restoration, and I'm very honored, very pleased to be working with the tribe in this historic effort. We are in a critical moment. The tribe is engaging in the largest restoration project the largest river restoration project in history. We are working towards removing 4 dams on the lower Klamath River, and also improving habitat conditions for the salmon when they return home by securing in-stream flows for fish and working on water quality issues.
Thank you so much, Amy. Annel?
My name is Annel Hernandez, and I'm the Associate Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Our organization is a network of community-based organizations throughout New York City that come together to fight collectively for environmental justice. Our communities are low-income communities and communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted by the clustering of polluting infrastructure in our communities. And we are fighting to re-envision our communities and fight for a more resilient future. We work across a variety of sectors, including energy, waste, transportation, green infrastructure, and more and more we're focusing on climate issues. The communities that we represent include areas like the South Bronx, where the Point CDC has been a leader there for decades. It includes El Puente in Southside Williamsburg that have been doing work there for even longer than that, and other communities across New York City. And we're fighting not just against the burdens, not just against the pollution, but for the community-led solutions that we want to see.
Lastly, Brionté?
I am the executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters. We do a couple of things. We mobilize Georgians around climate and environmental justice issues. And mobilizing means educating them about the different issues that are coming up in their lives, helping them connect the dots with what they immediately perceive as a problem and connecting that back to the environmental issue that's underlying that. We help them understand their power in the system. Basically, how does this issue that they're experiencing get solved? And, what's the decision maker that can make that decision, and really empower them to come up with their own strategies and tactics and campaigns for moving that decision maker to take action on the issue that they're most concerned about. So a lot of ways, it's power building, it's capacity building, it's education, it's advocacy. And one of the most powerful levers that we have is encouraging people to get out and to go vote. So we make sure that every election cycle that voters are empowered with the information about the issues, especially environmental justice issues in their community, and that they know when to go cast their vote and how to do that, especially given all of the changing election laws here in Georgia.
Next question I have is, what does an environmentally just future look like to you? And now let's have you start.
In 2019, New York State passed the most aggressive climate legislation in the country, if not the world. It sets a target of 85% emission reduction and zero emission completely in our electricity sector. But most importantly, it has a mandate that 35 to 40% of clean energy funds must be targeted for frontline communities that are dealing most with the burdens of pollution. We are excited about operationalizing this landmark piece of legislation to make sure it results in the transformative changes that our communities want to see. Our member organizations have been leading in so many different ways across New York City. We make sure that we're doing the work on the ground, from youth organizing to housing organizing and more, and making sure that we have a seat at the table at the citywide and statewide climate policy tables to make sure that New York City is on track to meeting their goals and ensuring that they're doing it in an equitable way. We want to make sure that our communities reap the health benefits, the economic benefits, the job benefits, and other general community resiliency and social cohesion benefits of this transition. We want to make sure that an environmentally just New York City considers all the climate vulnerabilities that we're facing. First and foremost, our coastlines are very vulnerable to storm surge, hurricanes, and flooding, and we want to make sure that we're investing in ecologically grounded coastal protection for our communities. We want to make sure that we're investing in our urban forest that we have street trees in the communities that are most heat vulnerable and dealing with urban heat island effect. We want to make sure that as we build all of this, we're creating the types of jobs that our future demands. We want to make sure that we're creating local economies that are equitable, that are healthy, and that really can show the rest of the country and the rest of the world how we do it right. It's been a really exciting time in New York City for climate policy, and we're going to continue to ensure that they're implementing everything in the most equitable way possible.
Thank you. Brionté?
I would love to live in a world where communities of color are thriving and healthy and as clean and connected as the wealthier communities that we see, right? Usually, if you go into a community of color, there's some form of environmental degradation that's almost immediate when you cross the threshold into the community, right? So, for example, they're being sited next to landfills. So you roll down your window and you can smell the landfill in the air. They're being sited next to polluting coal plants or manufacturing facilities, and so you can see the smoke in the air. There was one community in South Fulton that they just were dealing with a landfill that was just so poorly managed that there was something flammable dumped into it. So, also a hazard, as well as environmental issue, public health hazard. There was a fire that started and just burned for like months, and nobody did anything about it. It was just spewing out for several months, this fire in this Black community, and people felt like that was acceptable to not address. So, I would like to live in a world where that's not acceptable, where we don't let communities of color suffer things just because, that's just what happens there, right? I don't want to live in a world where you can immediately feel the difference in the quality of life just because you're in a community that is dominated with people of color versus a community that is full of white folks. And so, it really comes down to quality of life and to public health and to economy, right? Economic issues.
What is your big picture focus for the next few years? How can funders and advocates best support you? Brionté, let's have you start.
One of the challenges that I am organizing around, that I wake up every day thinking about, I literally dream about these things and wake up and scribble some strategies down in the morning, is the challenge of getting environmentalists in our state to vote. And environmentalists are people who are, self-identified environmentalists, yes, I'm pro-environment, I want to do this, but also people who naturally are inclined to be pro-environment, who might not think of themselves as environmentalists. Making sure that they go and they get out to the polls and that they vote in every election, and especially the down ballot elections, because that is where there is a major amount of impact to be made. I want this base of people to be informed about the issues that are impacting them in their community. And I want them to be informed about, again, the different solutions that they could have to these issues and the decision makers that are in place to help implement those solutions. And then I want them to be able to go to the polls and vote with that information, to be these informed voters. Before, climate change was a theoretical conversation. Do you believe in it or not? And that conversation was mostly being had at a federal level. But now there are levers at the state, the county, the city level, and people are less familiar with those positions. If you walk down the street at any given time and ask people what they're passionate about, they can tell you some things that they're passionate about. You ask them what the president thinks about those issues. Usually they can talk to you about who the president is, one, even, and then two, what their thoughts are about the president's approach to those issues. You ask them about their senator, less people can tell you about their senators, but it's still a pretty good number of people can tell you who their senators are. And they might have trouble exactly knowing where their senator is on that issue. But then as you get further and further down and you start asking about their mayor and their county commissioner and their city council people and what they think about these issues, they usually have no idea who those people are or what their stance is on this issue. And usually the issues they're concerned about are issues that can be dealt with at that local level. So, you know, I think that that is the challenge, that is the opportunity, that is what I wake up every day trying to do, is to try to make sure that people, as we get down ballot, that they remain familiar with those elected officials, that they know what those elected officials are doing for the different climate and environmental justice issues that they're concerned about. And that they feel empowered to go vote with that information every election cycle, every time, no matter what happens with the voting laws, right? That they're able to navigate any changes to voting and still be able to make sure that their voices are heard on that scale.
And Annel, how can funders and advocates best support you?
The best way that funders can support our work is by acknowledging the scale of the issue and the systems change that need to occur to transform everything. We need to be on the ground. We need to conduct community-based research. We need to sit at all the policy and stakeholder tables at the government level, city and statewide, and more at the federal level. There's a lot of work to be done, and we need to make sure that people of color are in leadership positions across all of these areas. I also want to uplift the importance of community-based work. I live in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and so there are a few community organizations that I would love to highlight. First, El Puente, based in Southside Williamsburg. They do wonderful youth organizing, environmental justice, and arts programming that has been an anchor for the community for decades. And they're one of our member organizations. I also have the pleasure of sitting on the board of two local groups. First, BK Rot. They are a local bike-based organic waste pickup operation, and they have really been thinking about how we transform our solid waste system and hire young people from the community to process the organic waste in a community garden and create soil that then they can give back to the community. I also sit on the board of Newtown Creek Alliance that has been advocating around the remediation of Newtown Creek, a Superfund site in North Brooklyn that has a lot of hazards, especially as we think about sea level rise. And they're thinking about how we ensure that we protect our coastlines while protecting our industries and ensuring that we can become more resilient.
Amy, how about you?
Thank you. So the big picture for the next couple years is, of course, to get the 4 lower Klamath River dams removed by 2023. And we are working on various regulatory processes to get to dam removal. We are working on, negotiation of all of the various contracts in order to get us to dam removal. So big focus there. Also working on securing in-stream flows for salmon in the Klamath River. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there to make sure when the salmon come home, they've got a comfy home and can swim upriver and spawn. So, really excited about the next couple of years and the potential change that it can bring. On that note, restoring the Klamath has huge potential, of course, to improve the Yurok community, but also to support offshore commercial fisheries and really help rebuild, the communities that rely on salmon in the ocean. Also, another interesting point is that, it's very sad, but the southern orca whales are on the verge of extinction because they're starving, because there's no salmon for them. And those salmon used to come from the Klamath. So when we get salmon back in the ocean, the orca whales will have food. You know, so there's just exponential benefits of restoring this river that, you know, goes from the headwaters of Oregon and flows down all the way to the ocean. And then those fish, you know, go all the way from the Sacramento River up to the Columbia River. And so you're, you know, you're helping the whole ecosystem and the ocean in that range. So there's just so many benefits to restoring the Klamath River, and I'm really excited about the potential change that dam removal and then, you know, getting more water in the river can bring to restoring the ecosystem of not only the river, but the ocean too. So focusing on that. Funders can help by supporting my organization, Ridges to Riffles Conservation Fund. You know, we are in the heart of all of this work. You know, and really helping to guide the river, to lead it, you know, and not just from a law and policy perspective, also from a scientific perspective. We work with the tribe's scientists who are, you know, the best on the river, and it's a very strong advocacy approach to couple, you know, Indian law, environmental law, and science, and not just you know, modern science, the old Yurok anecdotal traditional knowledge, right, about how that river worked. So we combine all of that to inform our advocacy, and it's a very strong approach to change. And so, you know, I highly encourage funders to support our work. I encourage also funders to support Indian tribes directly and to support other Indian nonprofit organizations. Indian country at large receives a very small portion of philanthropic support, and there's a very big need. You know, Indian country remains one of the most underprivileged, underfunded, you know, poor communities out there. And just for context, on the Yurok reservation, the annual income for tribal members, annual income is $11,000, $11,000 a year, you know. So there's just tremendous need in Indian country, and, you know, and also tremendous opportunity to increase the amount of support that we all receive. So, you know, I encourage folks to reach out to tribes, to reach out to Native organizations and get involved.
Can you shout out a woman of color you admire? Annel, let's have you start.
One of our members is called El Puente. They're based in Southside Williamsburg, and one of their founders and leaders is Dr. Frances Lucerne. Her work and her leadership in North Brooklyn is very inspiring to me. It's in my community, so it means a lot to see her doing this work for so long, and continuing to stay committed and continuing to root the work on the Black and Brown community that they serve.
And Brionté?
It's a woman of color that has really done a lot of work and opened up a lot of doors is Stacey Abrams. And I know that seems probably a little stereotypical for someone coming from Georgia. But fun fact, I actually lived in Stacey Abrams' district. My first time living in my own apartment. I lived in a neighborhood called Kirkwood in East Atlanta. Stacey Abrams is my representative. And I remember going to the Capitol, and it was my first time ever at the Capitol. And I don't know if you've ever been in your state capitol, but it is a little intimidating, especially for your first time, especially for a young woman of color. And so, you know, I see all these people in suits, all of these important lobbyists for all these big companies and all of these legislators, and everyone seems so important. And I'm just, you know, very not confident in this space. But I was there to talk to my representative, my state representative. And my state representative is Stacey Abrams. So I went in her office, and she was one of the few people that actually took the time to sit down with her constituent, because I was there with a group of other people who had trouble meeting with their Representative Stacey Abrams was present. She took the time out of her busy schedule. She was the House Minority Whip, which is certainly not an easy job. And, she's got to keep up with 180 representatives and what their positions are on every piece of legislation that is getting traction. So the fact that she took the time to sit down with me was just so powerful. And I start to go into my spiel. I can't even remember what I was lobbying about at this point, but I just remember I was like voice shaking and trembly. And she's just like, "Hi, Brionté. It's just, let's take a breath and let's just talk about this." And I was just, I get a little emotional thinking about it because, I felt valued. I felt like what I had to say mattered. And I felt like what I did say did change her thoughts on the issues and how she moved that forward. And so it's a little emotional because all these years later, here she is, she's run for governor. She's really changed the game on organizing in the state, really validated the strategy of leaning into your base and making sure nobody's left behind. Especially people of color, especially women, especially young folks, just making sure that every marginal vote is treated as just as important as any other. And so, that was something that she validated, again, not leaving people behind. That's what she made me feel like when I met with her in person. And that's what she campaigned with, that strategy. And we continued to take that strategy and implement it for years. So after the governor's election, the work wasn't done, right? We had organizing in 2019 that was done. And then of course, 2020, where we had some of the highest turnout the highest turnout that the state has ever seen. And we were able to defeat the odds and flip the top of the ticket for the president and the Senate races. And all of that was on the coattails of Stacey Abrams. So I just appreciate her for all of her leadership and for opening doors so that groups like mine can be seen and heard and supported to do important work that we need to really transform the state of Georgia, to transform what voting looks like in the state. So yeah, go Stacey.
Amy?
Yeah, so so Susan Maston, who, for full disclosure, is my auntie, but she really has just been a guiding light and my inspiration in my career. She was I think the second Yurok tribal chairwoman, or chairperson, actually. And she was our leader for a very long time. Even before she was the chairperson, she came home in her early 20s and negotiated and secured 50% of the Klamath salmon fishery allocation for the Yurok people. In addition to that, she was the first woman president of the National Congress of American Indians, which is our, Indian country's largest sort of political entity. She is also the founder of the Women Empowering Women for Indian Country nonprofit group, which is an advocacy support organization for Native American women. And she's just a force and has really just helped me understand how women of color, Native women, can navigate law and politics. One of the things that she really helped me appreciate is that, you don't have to be an old white man to be efficient and to be effective. You don't have to talk like them. You don't have to move like them. You can move in your own truth, whatever that is, like embracing your own unique gifts and bringing those to the table. And that is your truest exercise of personal sovereignty and leadership. And, I think as women start moving up the ranks, it's important that we don't mirror behaviors that aren't true to ourselves. it's important that we bring our diversity, we bring our cultural experience, we bring our own ideas, we embrace our own way of doing business in these roles. And she really helped me come to terms with that and accept that. And then also just by the way that she approached her own advocacy showed me that that is an effective approach. So I love her dearly. I'm so proud of her, and you know, I give her a huge shout out.
Thank you again to Amy, Brionté, and Annel for sharing your expertise. We're now going to move into a brief conversation between myself and Rachel's Network's board chair, Kasdin, about our learning at Rachel's Network in funding environmental justice and women's leadership. Hi, Kef.
Hi, Ariana. How are you?
Oh, good. So can you tell us a little bit about how you learned about and joined Rachel's Network?
Yeah, so I learned about Rachel's Network from another member who I happened to meet when we both spoke on a panel. And at the time, I had started a company that was in the renewable energy space, and I also was doing venture capital investments in renewable energy, but I knew that I was really being mission driven and passionate about women's leadership and environmental causes. So I attended a Rachel's Network meeting as a guest, and I was so impressed with the work that Rachel's Network members were doing both individually and collectively, and also the way the organization could really help inform my own philanthropy, to which I was really just getting started. And so I joined, and I quickly became very deeply involved in the organization. I served on a committee that developed our Vision 2020 strategic plan. I co-led one of our early co-funding efforts, and I joined the board. And all of those activities were really the building blocks to our Catalyst Award.
Thanks. Again, we're so happy to have you as a member and board director. I really can't imagine Rachel's Network and where we've gotten without you.
So I have a question for you. As someone who led the development of our Catalyst Award, can you share what you've learned about environmental justice over the last few years?
Sure. I'll admit, still learning a lot. But one striking thing I learned when we started to develop the award back in 2016, 2017 was the disparity in funding that BIPOC-led groups received compared to their white peers. According to reports at the time, the funding landscape was incredibly inequitable, and it still is. But a 2016 report stated that only 0.6% of foundation giving was targeted to women of color. It was hard to do a look inward and see that Rachel's Network's own collective giving, separate from the individual giving that members do, that it mirrored these disparities. And while we're very proud of the work we funded throughout the years, as it has tipped the scale in so many cases, our history was in line with philanthropy's overall lopsided and biased trends. We've made great progress with reconciling these inequities, but we still have a long way to go. And so that's why so many of us at Rachel's Network are committed to supporting environmental justice work. I'll also add that there's some learning that's happening right now. So when Rachel's Network started to develop the award back in 2016, we knew specifically that we wanted to focus on recognition of women. This was born out of our mission, our culture, and our namesake, Rachel Carson. Women already have the skills, verve, and experience, especially lived experience, to make a difference. What they didn't have was structural support. So last year we started providing support not just to the individual awardees, but to the organizations and work they do as well. The work and the women are inseparable. I've heard that sometimes their greatest professional work needs can't be captured timely in a grant proposal. So for instance, if Alana doesn't have reliable childcare next week, what work can't she get done to protect her home of Bristol Bay? So this is where our learning is right now. How can we be of service creatively and with love to these women who are changing the world for all of our benefit? And so how about you, as a sustained funder of Rachel's Network and the Catalyst Award, what have you learned or what has surprised you?
Thanks, Ariana. So Rachel's Network has always been a place for me to learn from other members as well as from those working in the environmental space. And many of my insights have come from, admittedly, our pre-pandemic in-person meetings in various locations around the country and internationally. And at each of these meetings, we typically did a deep dive on a particular ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I mean not only the natural environment, but also the nonprofit environment of groups working on the ground in those places to address those local environmental issues. And it was on such a trip to Durham, North Carolina, that I really began my own journey to learn more about how my philanthropy can impact environmental justice. That was the theme of that meeting. And while I knew the term, I have to admit, I really hadn't been intentionally focusing my philanthropy in that direction, much as you stated the national statistics. And it was the same time we were announcing our first Catalyst awardees. So it was very timely for my own learning as well as for the organization. All of that pre-work plus then the pandemic, the racial reckoning that we've gone through in the past year have really shifted my thinking about my funding. And I have taken the initiative on my own to really learn, to read, and then to discuss what I have been learning with other Rachel's Network members. And that has really been invaluable. So through Catalyst, it's really helped me that Rachel's Network has identified particular environmental justice organizations and their funding needs. And so I took advantage of that. I contributed to our Community Resilience Fund that we set up early in the pandemic as kind of an emergency funding to the groups we've met with in Durham and other places, as well as our Catalyst awardees and finalists. No strings attached, no applications or proposals, just sending them some money. And the positive outpouring that we heard from all of those recipients really just propelled me further to continue to rethink how I was doing my philanthropy. I have since funded several of our Catalyst awardees organizations when they reached out through you, Ariana, with a specific need. And there's so much more. So we at Rachel's Network have really been looking at ourselves through a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, we call it JEDI lens. We've had lots of discussions among members about our philanthropy, the trends, and specifically what we can do to empower women of color in the environmental movement. And we've, through that process, really recognized our own privilege and power, and that we understand what we need to be doing differently going forward. So I have learned a tremendous amount through this whole time and process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm too very proud of the Community Resilience Fund grants. It was just such a team effort, and I'm so grateful to you and our other members who met that moment and continue to do so. So we've been proud to be in this space for a few years now, but we're still learning so much. Kef, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your past self about supporting environmental justice work?
So, you know, I think the elements were always there underneath in my upbringing, but I didn't really have the words and the frameworks to put around it. I've recently been introduced to the concept of trust-based philanthropy through Rachel's Network. And the key tenet that really resonates with me is this concept of multi-year general operating dollars. So what does that really mean? General operating dollars means you're funding whatever the organization needs most. They know better than I do. And it's really about supporting the people in the organization. Most of a nonprofit's budget is the people. And so rather than focusing on programs, just understanding that people need support is a big part of that philosophy. Multi-year. So if you don't have multi-year grants, it means that an organization starts over from scratch, from zero every year. And that's an enormous amount of energy that's taken up just in fundraising. And so giving multi-year grants relieves some of that pressure and really allows an organization to focus on its mission. And so I would tell my younger self to really think about that and to let go of previous notions I've had about risk and about due diligence, and really build a different philosophy about how to support these organizations. I also would tell my younger self to really think about my power and my privilege and how to use it for good, and to do it with a group that has shared values. So what advice would you give funders who are looking to support this work?
I would advise them to listen as much as you can, listen to and trust women of color, and listen to and trust the people they listen and trust. I would also underscore your point about general operating support, especially if you're passionate about advocacy. Juliana Pino, a 2019 awardee, once told me, regular people given the tools and information can do anything. And so much of what makes grassroots organizing work so effective is this truth. But they need flexible and long-term support to focus on building power. And lastly, I would advise folks to support our Catalyst Award. The group Climate Interactive has this great term called multi-solving. It is when something solves multiple problems with just one intervention. And I think the women in our broader Catalyst ecosystem are multi-solving. So if you care about racial justice, care about environmental issues, fund these women, care about women's leadership, fund these women. If you care about all three, as we do, fund these women. They are tackling these issues holistically and really living wholeheartedly a think global, act local approach. And you can see that from Annel, Amy, and Brionté's work, that their work is having a bigger impact than what's at home. Thank you so much for joining me, Kev, and for all of the speakers, Annel, Amy, and Brionté. Again, we're so indebted to you and your visions. Before we move to Q&A, I just wanted to remind you that we have a range of opportunities for both individuals and groups to get involved with Rachel's Network and the Catalyst Award. So please complete our post-session survey, visit our website, or you can contact me directly at ariana@rachelsnetwork.org. So we're going to move now into Q&A from the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Myself and Kef are here for Q&A. We also have Brionté in here too. Hi. So we had a question in the chat that I think you could answer, Brionté, which was from Gwen, who introduced the session. What corporations in your various parts of the country have been or are champions for environmental efforts?
You know, it's a really good question, and I can go ahead and tell you I'm not sure. I feel like there are other organizations in our state, like Georgia Conservancy, that are more focused on, you know, hands-on projects, stewardship projects that are, you know, better supported by the corporate community. And so, yeah, I would think that the folks that give to them stand out as pretty consistent donors. But since we're, you know, trying to challenge like power structures and like do all of this organizing around voting and controversial issues, we're usually not the most popular group to give to.
Brionté. Any questions from those in the audience? There's one from Roz. It seems like the environmental justice movement has got some great momentum. What are your hopes during this administration and the future in general? Do you want to take that one, Brionté?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the environmental justice movement definitely has momentum. I think here in Georgia, this is the first time I've ever really seen Black-led, justice-oriented groups partnering and having a line of communication with traditional environmental organizations in the state. And we're all really coming together to figure out how to show up for this moment because it is a critical moment, right? We've got a lot of federal commitments coming out of the Biden administration. We have a lot of that's going to go over into Congress. There's a lot of bills that have been introduced in Congress. All of them have transformative potential for our communities. Many of them are similar, but like slightly different. So I think what's going to matter is that we, as groups on the ground, continue to monitor all of these different proposals that are coming out administratively and legislatively, and then do the work in state to build support for what community feels is most transformational, right? So a lot of that is taking feedback that we've already gotten from community through organizing efforts, continuing to build on that organizing so that we're communicating in this moment, like what this opportunity is, and getting that feedback back up as quickly as possible to, you know, our senators and our Congress people and administration staff. It certainly is a lot of work, but there's lots of groups involved at different parts of the spectrum. One of our partners, for example, Partnership for Southern Equity, they did a really great, they've been working on this Justice 40 Accelerator, which is like positioning communities of color to be recipients of a lot of these benefits of potential funding that comes from these efforts. And so everybody's sort of looking at the field and saying, okay, we need someone here, we need somebody here, we need somebody doing this to make sure that the benefits truly are equitable. So I just hope that that continues to work, that we continue to work together in coalition and share information and fill those gaps because yeah, this is a moment. It's a special moment, and I think we can make a lot of progress.
Great, thank you. I'll also put the Justice, I'm so glad you mentioned the Justice 40 Accelerator. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. I'm going to kick that question to you, Kef. What are your hopes during this administration and the future in general?
Thanks, Ariana, and thanks, Brionté, for you are much more the expert. But I guess what I would just add is 2022 and 2024 are not that far away. So we need to hold this administration accountable, and we need to be doing all the work on the ground. But we can't just go to sleep about the next election and wake up in 2 years or less than 2 years, because that won't work. And I think, Brionté, you even mentioned that earlier in your discussion about Stacey Abrams. So the work needs to start now to continue to build towards those elections going forward, so that we can keep the momentum and this doesn't become just a less than 2 year exercise. I also want to point out, because there was another question in the chat, at Rachel's Network, we actually have, the Rachel's Network itself is a 501c3 organization, but we do have a C4 called Rachel's Action Network. And it is within that group that we are looking at how we can support the kind of grassroots political activity that needs to go alongside the grassroots environmental justice work and really is complementary to that work. And so we are starting to think about and launch activities that will really complement and enhance and get us to continuing this momentum way into the future, and not just sort of in the immediate administration. So that's how that's what I'm thinking about. Sorry, I'm already thinking way ahead, not this administration.
Thanks, Kef. I have one question specifically for you, Brionté. What role can Giving Circles play in supporting elected officials that champion environmental justice? And what's the best way to identify officials who are leading in this area?
Yeah, I was like reading the second part of that question. I was like, oh, I didn't get to that. You know, I think that every state's different, but at GCB, what we do every year is we do endorsements during the election process. So we make sure that candidates that, and especially incumbents that have been doing great work are recognized and lifted up in our state. And so our website is a good place to find elected officials and candidates that we think are doing a great job. One is the endorsements, but we also do a scorecard. And so every legislative session, we track votes, we figure out, you know, which legislators were voting the right way on which bills. And it just comes down to a score that's easy to read. That's like, oh yeah, my elected official's in the green, or woof, my elected official needs some work, right? The scorecard is a tool for you to do that. So we have it at the state level, and then our national counterpart, League of Conservation Voters, produces a national scorecard for environment votes. And so on our website, you can access both the state and the federal. So gcvoters.org/scorecard is a really great place to go. Yep, there you go. And so then also the other thing that I want to drop is the Give Green platform. It's something that I'm aware of. It's beyond just the state of Georgia, but it's something that, sorry, I think I chatted it to the other panelists. Oh, I can chat it to attendees. Paste it. But it's a really great platform for you to go and find pro-environment candidates who are running all over the state, or excuse me, all over the country. We have Reverend Warnock, for example, who was on the Give Green platform last year. So those are really good places to find champions that will need support through their elections and after they're in office.
Great, thank you. These are great resources, yes. I think, do we have time for one more question? I think from Kasdin. Can you share your thoughts on funding environmental climate research, best practices? Brionté, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the thing is we have to do a lot of research, right? Part of our partnership that I was talking about, where, you know, all of these groups groups that have just been doing like, hey, Black Lives Matter, like people need to vote, people to the polls, like they've been doing lots of work. And then we've got environmental groups who are over here in, you know, nerdy wonky policy land, like, should we do a renewable energy standard? What about a 20 by 50, you know, 50% commitment, right? Like, so we're over here in this policy world, like getting really deep on that, and there needs to be somebody doing that. And there's these efforts to be like organizing on the ground, building power in community, and we're like plugging these things together right now. And what we have to do is figure out how do we communicate about these things, right? When usually you only have a few minutes of a voter's time, of someone's attention. How do you convey, hey, there's all this federal stuff happening, and this is like why, you know, how it's benefiting you and like your actual kitchen table problem, right? And I think that's just a major challenge for the environmental community, because we have all this research that says people support climate or support action on climate, and they in particular want to see us expand clean energy, right? So there's all of the support, poll after poll, regardless of party, regardless of race, that shows these high levels of support for these issues, but there's like, it's just like not happening. Our legislators are still, you know, not moving forward with the sense of urgency with this. So then we did a poll last year, and one of the things we asked was, all right, in this set of issues, healthcare, criminal justice, et cetera, environment and climate were one of those issues, please rank what is like most important, like your top 3. And environment and climate came in dead last, because all the other issues were perceived to be more urgent. And that is what like elected officials and the public are like responding to. So it's like, we have to get better at like making environment and climate not seem like this big far away issue it's like gigantic that I don't know how to solve, right? Like, I don't know how this, like, yes, I want a planet to live on. I'm not sure what that means, how to do that, right? Like we have to get past this stage, like where there's general support, but now we're getting specific. Now we're saying, these are the bills that we're trying to pass. This is the transformation we're trying to make. And how do you make sure that people understand that and support it when it matters, right? So there's a lot of research and experimenting and reaching out to voters in particular, testing messages to see what's most effective at getting responses, getting people to take action, what people are like, I don't even know what this means, right? That type of research happens through our organizing, and we always, organizations always need funding to support voter contact and, you know, testing these different messages through polling and focus groups, and yeah, just how different outreach efforts perform. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's when I think research, that's what I think is rising to this challenge.
Do I have a second to add, or are we out of time? I will just, I want to lift up something. I want to lift up something Amy said, and something that I've really learned over the last couple of years, because I used to fund research in climate, is that we need to listen to the wisdom that's already there in these communities. So rather than funding new research, just fund uplifting the work that's already happening, that science that's really, you know, generations old in these communities. Folks on the ground know what needs to get done. They don't need more research. They just need to have their knowledge be recognized, and just let them do what they do, give them money to support that. So I just want to say, don't fund highfalutin research, fund folks on the ground doing this work already.
Yeah, definitely.
Testing happens in real time.
Well, thank you, Brionté, for joining us for the Q&A. Thank you again to Kef, to Gwen and Philanos. We're so happy to have had this opportunity to connect with you all. I've shared my email in the chat, and happy to follow up with everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.